On behalf of Sidelets Education, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Making Data-Informed Decisions for ELs in Texas, Understanding Assessment and Accountability, with our speakers, Mary Martin and John Sidelets. And if you're not from Texas, don't worry. You'll be able to use this information and apply it to your students. I'm Valentina Gonzalez. I'm one of the co-authors of the book, Reading and Writing with ELs, and an educational consultant and content creator for Sidelets Education. I'm going to be working on the back end of this webinar with Dr. Monica Lara, who is also a co-author of this book and a senior educational consultant and the author of one of my favorite books, Toma la Palabra. Before I turn it over to our speakers and Dr. Lara, here are a few reminders about the webinar. First, this webinar is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. So those of you that have pre-registered, you're going to receive an email in about 24 to 48 hours after the showing, and it'll include the link to the recording and some additional resources as well. And if you're live with us in this Zoom, we encourage you to chat with us and with all attendees using the Zoom chat feature. Finally, feel free to take any snapshots during the webinar and share them with your colleagues and on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and use the hashtag ELs in Texas. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lara.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our speakers today. First of all, we have Mary Martin. Who doesn't know Mary Martin? I had the privilege of training with her last week on one of the sections of the book. She is very well known in the area of accountability and best practices, policies, and the law of what we need to do with ELs in Texas. And ELs, I mean, she knows federal law, she knows state law, and she's an expert with technology. So she was very instrumental in helping us navigate the different platforms when COVID hit. So Mary is going to be with us presenting the piece of accountability. And we also have John Sidelets, the leader of our company, Sidelets Education. He is an author of the book and author of 7 Steps to a Language-Rich Interactive Classroom, and very interested in doing what's best for ELs in Texas. And the one that is steering up the research that is going on right now with the 7 steps delivery model that we have at Sidelets Education. So he's going to be one of your speakers. So enjoy the session. And John and Mary, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you, Dr. Lara. I know some of you, I'm going to say this again, I know some of you like to tweet during the webinars. If you like to tweet, you know, here's all of our information. We got hashtag ELs in Texas. You know, make sure you put that down if you're tweeting during the webinar. We also included both John and my Twitter handle. And if Valentina and Dr. Lara would also put theirs in the chat, we'd love to have y'all tag Sidelets. It'd be great. And you've got all of our information for following us on Twitter as well as the Facebook and website and our website, and then the blog. So we are ready to go now. Let's see. And you're here, as Valentina said, for making data-informed decisions for ELs in Texas. And this is our final short little webinar in this series. So if you haven't been with us live, please go back and watch the recorded webinars. These are great for your PLCs, and there's a lot of great information in them. And we are going to focus in on, you're just going to get a little snippet, a little tiny taste of understanding assessment and accountability. All right, friends. So who hasn't seen this wall before? You know, we're going to talk about assessment and accountability. Take a minute and let's look at this visual. What does it bring to mind? What feelings does it invoke? You can kind of think a minute about a visual that looks like this. Have you ever experienced it? What do you think's going on? So in the chat, if you'll just really quickly write, oh, there we go. What's going on? And how does it make you feel? get a quick summary of our little visual here. And if you're watching the recording, write some ideas down on a sticky note or a piece of paper. What does this make you think of when you see this visual? You see this image? Pressure. Nervous about student performance. Oh my gosh, we're hitting it. Tracking. Overwhelmed. Categorization, grouping, trying to determine who will and won't succeed. Anxiety. What do you think, John? I think they're hitting everything that we've talked about.
Yeah. Tracking was something I had not thought about with that Marianela from Tyler that she mentioned about the sense of the tracking students that you see some of that in there. And this is not new either, that we're at 2021. This is probably 1950 some odd, early 60s maybe. And this is not going away either, where data is still going to be with us and we're still going to have ways we're going to be looking at it.
That wall of fame, wall of shame. Yeah, that's a term I've used before too. Opportunity in one part of the story of data. Now, is it data or is it data?
Character on Star Trek is data, so that's what I'm going with.
All right, John, do you have anything else you want to talk about on this? Because this is a good jumping point.
Well, we're going to see more about something called data shaming later in the presentation, but I'm going to save that for when we look at our urban district, other that we're going to look at in just a few minutes.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things I do want to point out is that the black and white picture is this has been happening for a long time. And if you look at, this, it looks like they're in somebody's, their teacher's lounge. You can see it looks like the guided reading books are in the background. So we've continued to go in kind of this cycle that, we look at the data and how we're examining it and just those conversations. And I think some of the feelings that people put in the chat really hit home, that fear, that anxiety. So this is not something new. This has been happening for a long time, the way we kind of categorize and look at our students. And let's see if we can get a little, maybe we can't make you fall in love or feel like an Einstein about data. But let's see if we can get it to the point where it's a little less overwhelming. Maybe we can just move one level of understanding, where we feel like, okay, I know what it is to focus on when I'm talking about ELs and data. And so we just kind of move it along at least one level instead of feeling so overwhelmed by all that data that's available to us. And now, friends, those of you who've been watching our recorded sessions know that I say this every time, but I'm just, think that our book is such a helpful book to have with you as you're kind of looking at your programs and to kind of, dig deeper into the program that you'd like to build and the program that you have that's already there in your district. So if you have the book, ELs in Texas, What School Leaders Need to Know, then you're familiar with the layout. Dr. Lattice got our book up there. And you can see how much she has hers tabbed. Each chapter has a section for legal lineage and just enough information. The assessment and accountability section is very robust. It contains 6 topics, and I know that I say that every session, but each section is filled full of need to know information for our school leaders, whether you're a teacher or leader, an instructional coach, an administrator, or a district leader. So today we're going to give you just a sampling of what we'll deep dive into on June 9th to support you in building a highly effective EL program. So please join us on June 9th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And we're going to further explore assessment and accountability in order to make data-driven decisions that support our EL students. So we're going to take a minute to reflect on this question. I'm going to turn it over to you, John.
Thank you. So we'd like to think first about what is a commonality shared by all state assessments. And I mean, when I say all, I mean all assessments of kids, assessments of systems, assessments of teachers. What are some commonalities of all state assessments that we're thinking about? Just type that into the chat, please. What are some, I believe that a commonality shared by all state assessments is, as soon as you've got something all state assessments have in common, type it into the chat for us. Yes, there's a comparison based on standards. Very good. In every kind of assessment, you've got the standard and you're using that standard to compare how far people are towards that bar or ahead of that bar. Anything else? Jargon has its special words, right? Common level state assessments is they're driven by state standards. Yes. That's a great one from David. He says they can be used to inform our instructional supports and our students. So what we're thinking about the commonalities was that when we're thinking about our state assessments, that one of the important things to think about is that there is a standard, that there is something that we're looking at that we're basing this on. But the other side, and why we have this picture here, is that there's also little human beings involved in it. That it's not just the standard. There are people that we're dealing with when we're looking at our state assessments, these little lives that are there, and that there's good and bad things about that. One of the good things is that by zeroing in on data, we can actually have an effect on those kids' individual lives. Now, sometimes I know that when we showed the picture of that war room back there, there was a feeling of being overwhelmed when you looked at it, like, oh my gosh, what is all of this? When we talk about assessment and accountability in Texas, one of the important things to think about is this question: are we moving the needle? And that's going to be the central question. That's going to be two sort of terms or phrases that we're going to think about today in this short 16 minutes we have left. Moving the needle and is the positive, and data shaming would be the negative side of things. Moving the needle means, are we looking at data in such a way that our decisions are data informed so that these kids are moving towards a concrete goal that we have set for them? That might be moving them forward one or more levels of language proficiency. It might be moving them forward in their performance on a math assessment or a reading assessment. But the question is, are we moving the needle? Then I want to ask this question: am I collecting data to say that the instructional interventions I'm using are moving the needle? Is what I am doing moving the needle? For example, in 1998, when I was teaching in Floresville, we had TOS 1, then we went to TOS 2. When we first started doing social studies testing, we had 67% of my students passing the social studies assessment, with my ELs were in the 30s. So we did interventions, and 2 years later, we had every subpopulation above 90%. So we looked at the assessment and we said, how are we moving that needle? So I'm going to give you an example here. If you could click to the next slide, Valentina, of moving the needle on slide 10. Okay, minor. Okay, so what does move the needle for ELs? What exactly does is this: comprehensible input plus low stress opportunities for output. And this is basic language acquisition stuff. But if kids are not getting comprehensible input and they're not getting the low stress opportunities for output, you don't get the language development. So that's the first question we want to ask is that happening in the classroom? Go ahead and click, Valentina. Okay, so I just wanted to share with you one way to look at your data when you're doing an intervention. And we did this recently. We shared this. And if you could paste that link, Valentina, into the chat, or you could use the QR code to find it from the slide here. Recently, we did our 7-step study that we presented at ASCD. And with a district that we had worked with, we looked at how, this is just looking at a math assessment. And we asking the question, are we moving the needle? So we looked at and compared students who were in the 7 steps group versus students who were not in the 7 steps group. And we saw how did they do on this math assessment 2017 to 2019. And so organizing your data in this way is a way of saying, are we moving the needle? But I can tell you the reason why the 7-step study worked, the biggest reason why it worked, is that we made sure with this district we were working with that we had comprehensible input, low stress opportunities for output. And so we, with coaching, with intervention across the district, we made sure that was happening, and we saw that we're moving the data, moving the needle. So go ahead on to the next slide. Mary? So with this core idea of comprehensible input, both low stress opportunities for output equals language development. I used to, when if you come to the training we're going to do later, I share these two things that are in the book, a little chart that says like input and output. Before I even want to look at what I'm going to classrooms to record data on when I'm watching a classroom, when I go in, the first thing I want to say is look at my ELs, beginning, intermediate, advanced ELs in the classroom, and wonder, are they receiving comprehensible input aligned to the TEKS or the standards that are being taught in this classroom? And then secondly, are they having opportunities to speak and write about what they're learning? And whatever other tools I'm learning, if that's not happening, we're not going to be moving the needle. So just real quickly, look at these little 4 pictures, or you could change it if you want to. You don't have to pick one of those, you could pick something else, but it's which one of these do you think would be what you would compare comprehensible input to? It's like glue, is it like tape? What is it like to you? Go ahead and type it into the chat. What do you think comprehensible input is like?
Maybe an example would be comprehensible input is like a pair of scissors for the students because it cuts the learning input into manageable chunks. And you could pick one of those things that are there, or like John said, you could pick something else.
Not everybody at once now. Okay. Well, to me, I'm going to give you mine, and then we're going to jump on to the next one. The comprehensible input, to me, is like glue. Because when you, we got Marcy Voss's, I'm going to steal hers here. She thought it was like glasses because it makes content come into focus. And I was going to say it's like glue because it makes it stick. It makes it stick with when the kids verbalize, the kids internalize. Okay, so let's look at this next. We're going to talk a little bit about what is the relationship to standards and assessment. You may have seen this slide before, but it's going to build us into the data we're going to look at with an urban district that we're going to share their data with you guys. Okay, so we're looking here at what is the relationship to TEKS, our standards, with TELPAS, our assessment. We have our STAAR, TELPAS, TEKS, and ELPS. The ELPS are to TELPAS, the TEKS are to STAAR as TELPS are to LPAS. Now, why is that important? Well, first thing is on this slide is that they're both found in chapter 74.4, which means they're both required by law. And even if you're not in Texas, every state has language proficiency standards, and it's a part of the ESSA. You've got the federal, that you must be implementing language standards in the classroom. So they're both equally required. Now, they both are assessed. Every state has an assessment, and ours in Texas is the TELPAS. But here's the part that we missed that we're going to look at very carefully. If you are implementing ELPS, you're going to effectively, your English language proficiency standards effectively, you're going to see improvements on STAAR. So let's take a look now at—
So John, before you go on, and just to
Sure.
kind of tag on that, you know, like you were saying about ESSA, that it's regardless, and since we have some friends from other states, that regardless of what state you're in, with ESSA requiring that state assessment, then you also have, you know, you have the language proficiency piece that you have to do. You also have your state assessment as far as the achievement piece, and those are all required by ESSA. So you can use this information in the same way that we're doing, but we're familiar with our Texas assessment. So we're going to show you this via the vehicle of the Texas assessment. But you still have that same ability with your own state assessments to do this. I'm sorry, John.
The thing about it being part of federal law too is that it's not going anywhere. I mean, I remember teachers early on and administrators and leaders saying, well, ELPS, is it just a phase? Is it just going to kind of come and go? Is it something we don't have to pay attention to? And but they're here to stay. It's a part of federal education policy. So let's take a look now, and we're going to look at an urban district on slide 13 here. This is real data from a very large urban district in Houston. Now, I want to talk to you. I talked to you about moving the needle. And how do you know if you're moving the needle? Kids are performing better on an assessment. If we see our ELs moving forward on an assessment, we're moving the needle. But we have to be really careful when we look at ELs with data. Very, very careful. Why? Because we have a lot of what I call data shaming. Instead of data informing, we get data shaming. Now, what does that look like? Well, it looks like this. You are in the faculty workroom, and it's spring, and you just got your 13, 14 pages of data back from TEA, and you're on like page 13, whatever it is, you've rifled through all your papers, and you're looking through it, and now you're moving your little piece of paper down, and you're looking at all the data, and you go across the top row, and you're like, okay, here's all, oh, that's okay, male, female, oh, okay, and then you go to, you're looking at your Latino, okay, Hispanic, look at the Hispanic students, and African American, special ed, ooh, need some work there. Then you get to ELL. Everything explodes because there's this huge gap between EL performance and everybody else. And that gap is there every year. And do you know why that gap is there? Do you know the reason? There's a reason why there's always going to be a gap there, because they don't speak English and the assessment is in English. So if we're looking at dual language in elementary or in a bilingual class or taking a Spanish language assessment, you get a lot more diversity in those numbers. But let me mention this. Let's say we put you in France right now, and you're going to take a test in French, and you're a beginner in French, and you know math really well. You might get some of them right. You might be able to figure out a few of them, but you're going to struggle like you won't if you're more advanced. So we look at this data from Urban ISD. Here's does not meet grade level. Look at all ELs. My goodness, 58% don't meet grade level, whereas only 23% of our all. Now look over here, 42% approaches grade level, 78%. So if I am looking at this chart and I don't have any other information, what does it tell me? This is why leaders, and I know we got a lot of leaders here, don't share this chart with your faculty unless you explain this. Because what's going to happen is this chart by itself, without you explaining it, is data shaming. It says the ELs are the problem and we're doing terrible with our ELs. What I would say is this chart, do you know what it tells you about your ELs? Nothing. Do you know what it tells you about your teachers of ELs? Nothing. What it tells you, but what if we look at data slightly differently? And I wish I had 30 minutes for this, but I've only got 6, so I'm going to go a little faster, Mary, I promise. Look at slide 14. What if we disaggregate the data by proficiency level? We are going to see a completely different story. So let's look at slide 15. Okay, same test we were just looking at. Now that 78%, the red over there, that's all 8th grade. But instead of lumping those other 3 together, our intermediates, advanced high, now we are breaking those down. I mean, we're breaking those down by proficiency level. Now what do we see? Well, we see our intermediates performing around 35%. We see our advanced high moving forward to just about 50%. And look at this, I'm sorry, advanced at about 50%, our advanced high are up here at 76%. What do we see happens as the ELs improve in language proficiency? What happens? They perform comparably to all 8th grade. Now guess what happens when they get reclassified? Type it into the chat if you know. What do you think happens when they get reclassified relative to all in most districts? In this particular urban district, I don't have the chart here, but we did the data for them with this urban district, comma, other large urban district. Yes, they pass and they excel. In your districts that have, where you have a lot of students who are reclassified, your valedictorian is often your ELs. Your valedictorian, I was just in Frisco and they were going through how many of their past valedictorians were ELs. And you know why? Because being bilingual is not a disability, it is a gift. And if we show data that just shows EL performance to all, what we're doing is data shaming and hiding the gift of being bilingual. Ser bilingüe es un superpoder, like we always say, it's a superpower. It is a superpower to be bilingual. And I think that we're going to share with you in our 3-hour session more on this, but what I really wanted to get across here was the question is, am I moving the needle? Now, one of the things I like to think about is this, that the question we ask is, are we moving students forward in language proficiency? So in Texas, we like to say 1 or more years of proficiency every year. And you know what? It's very reasonable. I remember working with Alvin ISD years ago, and they went from moving only about 30 to a little under 30% of the ELs moving forward 1 or more language levels in proficiency. After 3 years of intervention, they were up. Now they've got in Alvin ISD, they have 90–95% of their kids move up 1 or more levels on TELPAS every year at the secondary level. You can do it. It's not impossible to do, but we have to look at it and we have to do it and implement programs that make it effective. But we have to break down that data and ask, are our interventions successful? So what we need to do is stop using data to shame and start using data to inform so that we can look at and see that being bilingual is an advantage. We just need to create programs that get the kids proficient enough in English where we can show that it's an advantage. Okay, I think I was talking too loud and disturbed the neighbors here in the building. So we are right at 10:57. Monica, do you or Valentina have anything you want, or Mary, did you have anything you wanted to add in your thoughts on data shaming versus data informing?
I just think that this particular graph really shows not only that we've got very, very successful students who work very hard, but it shows the hard work of our teachers. And that really that's encouraging. That makes that data something that instead of being a stick, ends up being a carrot. You know, that we're very excited to see the data. We know that the work that our teachers have been putting into their classroom and their students has really has helped our students be successful. And that's really the message we want to continue to provide to our teachers, that their hard work is really helping our students perform at a very high level.
And also, the data doesn't come disaggregated that way, but I have worked with districts, and in most districts, you have data experts. It's just about explaining to them how you want the information given to you. And they are very willing to give it to you this way. So they just have to go an extra step, but your data people will be able to provide you with this information. It just doesn't come this way to you. It's comparing all ELs with all population. You will never see this when you look at the data that way.
And this kind of breakdown can happen regardless of the state that we live in. You know, if you're in Illinois or whatever, you know, other state you're in, you can break it by the, was it the WIDA or whatever it is that you're using, and match that up to who's passing your state assessment.
And it's just important that as advocates, we share this with all stakeholders and leaders. And, you know, if we're bilingual or ESL specialists, we give this information to administrators and district leaders and share it freely and widely so everyone understands the value that we have with students.
And just one more thing that I wanted to share. I know TELPAS measures proficiency in English, but let's not forget that the better the Spanish instruction, the better the English proficiency is going to be. So we need to really look at what is the Spanish instruction, what is the level of rigor that we are having in dual language programs or bilingual programs. Sometimes we tend to want to move fast to get the English, but let's remember what Dr. Escamilla says, let's teach English better, not faster. And the better your Spanish instruction, the better your English language development is going to be. So let's not forget about the rigor of your dual language program, Spanish-English.
So we'd like to close with just, if you could share with us in the chat, just anything during today's I learned, or I discovered, or I was reminded. And we'd also like to make sure, if we want to, Valentina, can you paste a link in the chat if you want to register for our 3-hour session where we're going to do a deep dive into analyzing data.
Yes.
It's on June 8th, I think.
Yes, I have it. One moment.
Let's see. I think I've got it right here.
It's in.
Thank you, Teresa. Looking at data by proficiency level is key. No more data shaming. You know, it's true, Monica, that when you think about that, that the information doesn't come packaged this way. We have to dig just a little bit to show what we're doing with our ELs.
And feel free to go out on Twitter as well. If you'd rather share your aha out there, then make sure you do the hashtag ELs in Texas.
And thanks to everyone for coming. Woo!
Thank you, guys.
And this is the session that John was referring to. That's our 3-hour PD session. I'm going to share.
That will be June 9th.
I'm going to share the link to that one more time in case you missed it in the chat. Mary, did you want to talk a little bit about this session?
No, this is just going to be a more in-depth look at your how to break down your data and some strategies and some ideas that'll help kind of get you on the back end of that data as well. Like, what can we do in the classroom too?
One thing we didn't mention today that we're going to be talking a lot about is, what do you do when the TELPAS has been so goofy these last few years because of COVID? And how do we use the TELPAS descriptors? We thought about talking about it today, but we didn't have enough time in a half hour. How do we use the descriptors and the assessment in the absence of high quality data because of both the change in the assessment in 2019 with speaking, and then also with the COVID, the issues that we've had with COVID over the last year. So we're going to be talking specifically about sharing some things districts are doing that have really impressed us, and then some suggestions that we have for how to manage this unusual year of data that we have.
And kind of tie a little bit of that into some of the information we've gotten back from the 7 steps as well. And so it'll be a nice package of data in the absence of data, and what to do.
Managing data in the absence of data. That's what we should call that section of the workshop.
That sounds really useful, especially right now. Very relevant information. Well, we want to remind you all also about our Sidelets Ed Chat, which is on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday every month at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time. On Twitter, it's a regular chat that we have, and it's really well attended with lots of leaders in our field. If you've never joined us, please join us. We often have co-hosts that share valuable information, so please join us on that. And then we also have the Sidelets blog at sideletsblog.org. Lots of our authors write and share information freely. So please go on sideletsblog.org, and we've got articles on various topics. I'm sure you'll find something that you need and that you'd like to learn more about. You can share with your colleagues as well. And finally, we'd like to all thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your work with bilingual, multilingual English learners. We love and adore you. Connect with us. And if you are not following John and Mary and Monica, you need to follow them. They are always sharing amazing information. So get on Twitter, follow them. I've shared their hashtags, but their Twitter handles, but they are amazing. So share them again on the chat, Monica, John, and Mary. So in case they haven't followed you yet, do it now. Get on Twitter. Do it now. Love you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much.